everyone. My name is Holly and I work in genealogy and local history at the Columbus Public Library. This video is part of a series about Ancestry 101, genealogy resources you can take home. In this series, I will be introducing books that I've grouped together to help patrons focus on an area of genealogy interest. These are books that you can place on reserve and have delivered to any branch. So here's today's topic: ancestors across the pond in England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. We have 3 books here at the main branch: The King's Passengers to Maryland and Virginia by Peter Wilson Coldham, Tracing Your Ancestors' Lives by Barbara J. Starman, and Tracing Your Family Tree in England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales by Kathy Chater. First is The King's Passengers to Maryland and Virginia. It gets a 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads ratings. In 17th century England, famine, vagrancy, violence, unemployment, and homelessness were contributors to increased crime. Punishment was harsh, and in any category of crime, all felonies were considered capital offenses punishable by death, from theft of anything of value over 1 shilling to trespass. To help alleviate overcrowded jails, the Vagabonds Act of 1597 attempted to introduce a reprieve of the death sentence if the condemned person agreed to be transported to an American colony and enter into bond service. But it took another 18 years until an edict was enforced that would allow the commuting of a death sentence, for the less heinous capital offenses, to a term of transportation and effectively a pardon. The pardons were couched in terms of clemency and mercy on the part of the sovereign, although it was really a way to get rid of domestic problems, criminals, and the poor. Those who were healthy in body and could ply a trade were preferred by the colonists and were given preference in sentencing. The hope was that they would be rehabilitated if given another chance, albeit while working in servitude. Because of the Crown's later subsidy of penal transportation and trade in convict labor, there are extensive records on both sides of the Atlantic, in British and Maryland archives. Unfortunately, the Virginia records for those that arrived before 1776 were destroyed when Richmond was burned in 1865, so the author relies on the British records. This book is arranged in 3 parts. First is a chronological listing of all convict ships arriving in Maryland and Virginia between 1718 and 1776. The known passenger lists include ship names, captains' names, and departure and arrival dates. The convicts were known as the King's 7-year passengers, and their names are arranged by county of origin and then in alphabetical order of surname. The second section is an alphabetical list of those advertised as runaways in Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania newspapers of the 18th century. Those that can be identified from both lists are indicated. The third part of the book has 18 biographical sketches of men and 1 sketch of a woman, Catherine Terwitt, who may be one of the few Maryland convicts that could boast royal descent and a coat of arms. She got 7 years for stealing jewelry. Our next book reminds us that genealogy research should be more than just a collection of names and dates. It should bring our ancestors to life so their stories can be passed down. Their traditions, their environment, their clothing, medical remedies, what did they do for a living, how did they worship, and were they educated? Tracing Your Ancestors' Lives by Barbara J. Starman emphasizes this wealth of information that social history adds to put your ancestors in context of time and place. This book gets a 4.33 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. The book covers 5 social history areas. In People, Family, and Society, for example, the author covers topics like demographics, ethnicity, immigration and social currents, customs and traditions, and alcohol and drugs. Each topic in every chapter includes a case study. A story is told about an ancestor using things like maps, census data, and newspaper accounts, books written at the time, journal articles, and photographs to recreate a time and place in history. For example, using historical newspapers and traditional genealogical sources, one story tells about the conditions suffered by a 7-year-old mill worker named Joseph Hebragam. He became crippled and required an iron brace to stand. His plight was used to help pass the 1833 Factory Act, ensuring children under 9 would not be permitted to work in factories. Maybe one of your ancestors had a bicycle shop. By using general history resources and newspaper articles of the time, your story might talk about the bicycle craze of the 1890s that is described in the case study in Health and Lifestyle. Or maybe you had an ancestor that lived to be 100 years or more. From church baptism records, family Bibles, marriage records, and newspapers, the story of your family's centenarian might resemble the case study in the mortality section. Even if you never write a formal family history, this book will give you ideas for ways to enrich the stories that you tell. Finally, we have Kathy Chater's Tracing Your Family Tree in England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. The book is oversized, like a coffee book table, but unlike so many oversized books that sit and gather dust, this is one that invites you to dive in and explore the content. There are clear headings, sidebars, timelines, sepia and color captioned photos, letters, portraits, and illustrations that guide you from your first steps in gathering pieces of your family story to actually writing your own family story. It gets a 4.25 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. This book is written for the British researcher, but the content for an American researcher looking to find British ancestors is extensive. Some hints to find your British family includes the use of surnames that began in Britain in the 13th century, taken from places or occupations, patronymics, or landmarks. The Scots often used a standard way to name their children, which gives clues to grandparents' names. Since parish authorities were responsible for keeping a multitude of records, the book reviews the administrative structure of the Church of England. At the top is the Archbishop of Canterbury that had precedence over the other provinces. The parishes were the smallest unit and each church had its own clergyman. Up until 1888, the parishes had both spiritual and civil responsibilities. Besides the ministers, there were clerks, overseers of the poor, highway surveyors, constables, scavengers, beadles, and sextons. The book includes several timelines and has suggestions for further help at the end of each topic. One huge resource, the National Archives of the UK, is making their digital records available on their website for free for the time being, as they are closed. Registered users may order and download up to 10 items at a time, to a maximum of 50 items over a 30-day period. This is a book well worth reading, not only for the genealogist, but for any Anglophile. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.